If you love classic detective stories, particularly those that, subvert the norms of the genre with a strong female protagonist, and you are okay with some antiquated language, then today's book just might be for you. Today I'll be reviewing Lady Molly of Scotland Yard by Baroness Orczy. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at a classic. Well, I don't know how classic it really is. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's a classic. I would have to say that I am only familiar with this because of the podcast Phoebe Reads a Mystery, which she has put out quite a few books over the years on it, and in the last couple of years she has just kind of done it sporadically, and so this was one that she chose to do. I thought this was an interesting book because I had never heard of it, and I was fascinated, first of all, to find out that it was by the same person that wrote The Scarlet Pimpernel, a book that I enjoy, although I didn't really know all that much about the past of it until I looked a little more into the author's history, and now not so sure I love that book as much as I did after I found out some of the positions and opinions of the Baroness. But it was still very much an interesting read. The thing I enjoyed about this book above all, well, so first of all, let me give you a little bit of a synopsis. It's called Lady Molly of Scotland. It was directly made in contrast to Sherlock Holmes, because that was very much part of that time period, this interest in trying to show this new age of deduction and the ability to solve things mentally and try to figure things out in a way that just hadn't really existed before. That's what made Sherlock Holmes such an interesting figure, and in many ways a kind of a Victorian element of the Enlightenment and this new ability of rational thinking that applies in a much more direct and in some cases in ways that really hadn't been considered before. And I think that's supposed to be part of the appeal of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, you're coupling that with a whole lot of other things that are coming of age at that time, including just a larger government, better faith in the justice system and in criminal inspections. And of course, forensics are just now coming on. And so Sherlock Holmes represents that age of deductive reasoning that was just coming about. This is one of the, I don't want to say many, but at least some of the other novels that kind of imitated it, that tried to take what Sherlock Holmes was doing and try to just twist it a little bit. And so it does, and particularly in this case, it relies much more heavily on the fact that the protagonist is a female, which is interesting. I will say that it has the writing style much similar to Agatha Christie than I would say to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. If you have read Sherlock Holmes, you would know that the language can be a little stuffy at times, but it is generally easy to read. I find Agatha Christie a little harder to read, and I found that the same with Lady Molly of Scotland. And so I would say that that is a bit of a warning or a caveat in terms of this age of inspectors and mystery and intrigue, that I find the characters generally to be fascinating and generally to be engaging, but on the flip side, there are certainly going to be issues with trying to understand it and translate it to a modern time. There are going to be those funny terms that you're just like, I would not use that word anymore, but I will leave that up to you to find those. This book is not one long story. It's actually a bunch of episodes, so it's an episodic. It was very much in the same way that you see Sherlock Holmes, and not so much in the way that you would see Agatha Christie. But again, this is highly representative of this time period in history in which you have this new element of science and investigation and inspection that is all making it possible for people to play on these idea of deductive reasoning. I'm not exactly an expert on this time period. I'm sure that if you were to dig into it, you could find other books that were very similar, as popular as Sherlock Holmes in particular was. I would imagine that there were many copycats that did a lot of the same things and played off a lot of the same ideas. And of course, you see that being still popular to this day, even with increased technology. It is not just having the latest and greatest in forensic technology. It is also having someone that can use a certain deductive ability. And so you can certainly see how that maps onto something of interest nowadays. This book, by the way, is set in Victorian/Edwardian England, which means that there is going to be a great deal of just stodginess and stuffy shirts and stuff that I already mentioned. The language might be a little hard to understand because of the time period, but you might also find it a little hard to understand simply because of the class system of England and this idea of a better appreciation or better understanding of how exactly English society interacted at this time. Again, historically, this is a fascinating time period because class is still very real. Even to this day in England, class exists, although I would say that it has been mitigated in many respects, but it is also a time period in which there's incredible movement in terms of political involvement, political parties, and not just in England, but worldwide, that is making this idea of a class system also clearly already a bit antiquated. And so those are the types of things that are going to be evident in this book. And I should also say, those are the types of things about what the Baroness commented on that I have to say that I wasn't a great fan of, but that is neither here nor there. I may not agree with her fully on her positions on class and ideas about how class should affect society, but I will say that you certainly do get a good deal of mileage out of the fact that she is clearly interested in gender roles and trying to buck the norms and certainly try to challenge the perception of the main character's inability to be quite as quality or efficient or just as insightful or thoughtful as other inspectors may have been. Who would I say this is for? Well, I would say that it is for anyone that is interested in this time period, which I think Sherlock Holmes is a good starting reference point, but I would say that you may not like it even if you do like Sherlock Holmes, and not just because of the questions of the challenging to gender roles, but also the fact that I do think it's a little harder to read and a little harder to understand and a little harder to follow what exactly the mystery is. But if you don't think that that's going to be a problem, then this certainly could be for you. Or if you're a fan of Agatha Christie, this is actually very similar to Agatha Christie's writing style. And you may really enjoy this book if you like the fact that it's going to be short and episodic instead of being one long novel. That appeals to a whole lot of people. Who isn't this for? Well, if you haven't read any early 20th century writing, especially English writing, then you may be in for a surprise when you go to read this and you just realize it's a little harder to understand than you expected. You think you know what every word means, but just contextually, there's going to be a lot that might challenge you. And if that is a bit much for you, then you may not enjoy this. Also, if you just don't think that that time period is going to be of interest to you, I don't think there's much about this book that's going to change that. Although, like I said, I do think that the challenge of gender roles, that certainly does have some value. But if that's not going to appeal to you, or that just doesn't have enough reason for you to get over all the other things, then again, this may not be for you. Of course, I would like to know what you guys have to say. Don't forget to let me know in the comments. Of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.